Thanksgiving at my mom's house was always loud. Too loud. The kind of loud where people laughed with food in their mouths, glasses clinked every few seconds, and old family stories got repeated so many times they stopped feeling real. But that year felt different the second I walked through the front door. I could feel it before anyone even said a word. The smell of turkey and cinnamon filled the house, but underneath all of it was tension. The kind you can't explain, only feel sitting heavy in your chest. My older brother was already there, talking about his promotion like he owned the room. My cousin had just bought a new house. Everyone had something to show off. Everyone except me. At 26, I was broke, unemployed, and sleeping on the couch in a tiny apartment I shared with a friend who was already tired of helping me. I had spent the last 2 years trying to build a small software startup that failed harder every month. My bank account was nearly empty. Debt collectors called me daily. And every person in that room knew it. My mom especially knew it. She barely hugged me when I walked in. Instead, she looked me up and down like she was checking how badly life had beaten me this time. "You could have at least worn a better shirt," she muttered before walking back into the kitchen. I laughed it off, but it stung more than I wanted to admit. That was the thing about my mom. She didn't yell often. She didn't need to. Her disappointment did all the work for her. Dinner started normally enough. Plates passed around. Small talk. Fake smiles. My aunt asking if I was still doing computer stuff. My uncle making jokes about when I'd finally get a real job. I kept smiling through it because that's what I always did. I learned years ago that defending yourself only makes people push harder. But then the conversation shifted. My brother started talking about money. About investments. About success. Everyone listened like he was some genius billionaire instead of a guy who got lucky in corporate sales. My mom sat there glowing with pride every time he spoke. Then someone asked me what I was working on. The table got quiet. I tried to explain my business idea. A platform for small online stores. I talked about how I believed e-commerce would explode over the next few years. I talked about building tools for everyday business owners instead of giant corporations. Halfway through my explanation, my brother smirked. "So basically," he said, "you're still unemployed." A few people laughed. I smiled weakly and looked down at my plate. Then my mom said the sentence that changed my life forever. "You need to stop pretending you're some entrepreneur," she snapped. "At some point you have to accept reality." The room went silent. She didn't stop there. "You've been a burden on everyone around you for years," she continued. "Your brother built a real career. Your cousins are buying homes. And you? You just keep chasing fantasies while everyone else cleans up your mess." I felt every eye at the table turn toward me. "You're 26 years old," she said. "When are you going to stop being worthless and grow up?" Worthless. The word hit harder than I expected. Not because strangers hadn't called me worse online. Not because I hadn't already thought it about myself during sleepless nights staring at unpaid bills. But hearing it from my own mother in front of the entire family did something to me. Nobody defended me. Not one person. My brother looked amused. My aunt awkwardly sipped her wine. My uncle stared at his plate like he suddenly found mashed potatoes fascinating. And my mom? She looked relieved. Like she'd finally said something she'd wanted to say for years. I remember sitting there frozen, trying to act like I wasn't falling apart inside. My face burned with embarrassment, anger, shame. Every failure I'd ever had suddenly replayed in my head all at once. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was the family disappointment. Maybe everyone at that table secretly agreed with her. Then my mom added one final line that pushed me over the edge. "You'll never build anything successful because successful people actually work hard." That broke something in me. I slowly put my fork down. No dramatic speech. No yelling. No movie moment where everyone suddenly realizes they were wrong. I just stood up quietly. At first nobody even noticed. Then my chair scraped against the floor and the room finally looked at me. I grabbed my old jacket from the couch near the hallway. The same jacket my mom once mocked because it came from a thrift store. I checked my wallet before slipping it into my pocket. $11. That was everything I had left in the world. My mom crossed her arms. "Where are you going now?" I looked at her for a second, but I honestly didn't recognize the woman standing there anymore. Then I walked toward the front door. Behind me someone muttered, "He'll be back." And maybe they believed that because I always came back before. Every time life knocked me down. Every time I failed. But this time was different. Because as I stepped out into the freezing November night with $11, no job, no backup plan, and nowhere to go, I made a promise to myself. The next time my family heard my name, it wouldn't be because I needed help. It would be because they couldn't ignore what I became. What none of them knew that night was that the worthless burden walking away from Thanksgiving dinner would one day build a company worth over $50 million. And years later, my mother would do something nobody in that family ever expected. The cold air outside hit me hard the second the door shut behind me. I stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, staring at the warm lights glowing through the windows of my mom's house. Inside, everyone had already gone back to eating. Back to laughing. Like nothing happened. That hurt more than the words themselves. I shoved my hands into my pockets and started walking without any real direction. Cars passed slowly through the neighborhood while Christmas lights blinked on rooftops. Families sat inside warm homes eating leftovers and watching football. Meanwhile, I was out there with $11 and a phone battery sitting at 8%. I wish I could say I felt motivated in that moment. Like some movie character ready to conquer the world after being doubted. I didn't. I felt embarrassed. Small. Broken, honestly. The truth is, my mom's words hit so hard because part of me already believed them. For years, nothing in my life seemed to work out. Every time I thought I was finally getting ahead, something collapsed underneath me. And it wasn't always like that. When I was younger, I actually believed I'd build something big someday. I was the kid always taking things apart just to understand how they worked. Old computers, radios, gaming consoles. My dad used to joke that I'd either become a millionaire inventor or accidentally burn the house down. Back then, my mom used to support me too. At least I thought she did. She'd brag to relatives about how smart I was. Teachers loved me because I could solve problems fast. By high school, I was building simple websites for local businesses and making decent money for a teenager. I remember the first $100 I earned online. I printed the payment confirmation and taped it beside my bed like it was proof my future had finally started. But somewhere along the way things changed. Maybe it started after my dad passed away. That completely shifted our family. My brother became obsessed with stability overnight. He got a business degree, found a corporate job, and followed the safest path possible. My mom admired that because after losing my dad, security became everything to her. But I went the opposite direction. I became obsessed with building something of my own. At first, everyone thought it was ambitious. Then a few years passed. And then a few more. Suddenly, ambitious became irresponsible. My first startup failed in 8 months. My second failed even faster. The third one nearly worked, but my business partner disappeared after draining what little money we had left. After that, friends stopped asking about my projects because the answer was always the same. Still figuring things out. Nobody says it directly, but after enough failures, people stop seeing you as someone chasing a dream. They start seeing you as someone making excuses. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I could feel my family losing respect for me piece by piece. Every holiday became uncomfortable. Every family dinner turned into an interview about my life choices. So what's your backup plan? When are you going back to school? Have you tried applying at your brother's company? It was always the same conversation. And honestly, I was exhausted too. There were nights I'd sit awake staring at my laptop wondering if I was delusional. Watching successful entrepreneurs online made it worse. Everyone posted motivational quotes and luxury lifestyles, but nobody showed the years of panic behind it. Nobody showed the maxed out credit cards or the fear of checking your bank account. People love success stories after they work. Before they work, they just look like failure. I kept walking through the freezing streets until my phone finally buzzed. A text from my roommate. "Hey man, landlord came by again. We're seriously late on rent." I stopped walking. I hadn't told him how bad things really were. The truth was I was months behind on my half. I'd been avoiding calls, dodging emails, pretending things were about to turn around. But they never did. Another text came through seconds later. "You okay?" I stared at the screen but didn't answer. Because I honestly didn't know. I sat down at a bus stop and looked at the cracked screen of my laptop bag beside me. Inside that bag was everything connected to the business idea my family laughed at. Mock-ups. Notes. Half-finished code. A cheap laptop that overheated every 2 hours. And somehow, despite everything, I still believed the idea could work. That was the crazy part. Even after humiliation. Even after failure. Even after my own mother called me worthless. A part of me still couldn't let go. I opened my laptop right there at the bus stop while cold wind cut through my jacket. The battery was almost dead, but I didn't care. I pulled up the latest version of the platform I'd been building for small online businesses. It looked terrible. Half the features were broken. The design was ugly. Pages loaded slowly. But underneath all the problems I saw potential. Small businesses were struggling to compete online. Most tools were expensive and complicated. I wanted to create something simple. Affordable. Something regular people could actually use without needing a tech team. For months, nobody believed in it except me. And after Thanksgiving dinner, I realized something terrifying. This failed too. My mom might be right about me forever. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the cold metal bench. That's when I noticed someone standing across the street watching me. At first I didn't think much of it. Just some guy near a closed coffee shop wearing a dark hoodie. But after a few minutes he was still there. Not moving. Just watching. I grabbed my bag tighter. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe the night had messed with my head. But something about him felt strange. Then my nearly dead phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I ignored unknown calls, especially from debt collectors. But for some reason I answered this one. Hello. There was silence for a second. Then a calm voice said something that instantly made my stomach drop. I heard you're building something interesting. The line crackled. And before I could respond, the man across the street finally started walking toward me. My grip tightened around the phone as the man crossed the street toward me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the traffic. Who is this? I asked. The voice on the phone ignored the question. You've been emailing small business owners for months, he said calmly. Most ignored you. A few responded. One of them forwarded your demo to someone I know. I stood up slowly from the bench. The guy in the hoodie kept walking closer, hands buried in his pockets. Every bad possibility rushed through my mind at once. Debt collector. Scam. Someone trying to rob me. At that point in my life I trusted nobody. Look, I said, already stepping backward, if this is some kind of joke I'm not interested. It's not a joke, the voice replied. You built that platform alone? I hesitated. Mostly. Your code is messy, he said bluntly. But the idea is good. That caught me off guard. Nobody outside of failed investors and angry clients had ever looked closely at my work before. Most people dismissed it after hearing the word startup. The man in the hoodie finally stopped a few feet away from me. He looked around 35, maybe older. Tired eyes. Short beard. Nothing threatening exactly, but something about him felt intense. Focused. Then he pointed at my laptop bag. You carrying the latest build in there? I stared at him. How do you know what I'm carrying? Instead of answering, he nodded toward the phone. Keep talking, the voice said. He works with me. I looked from the phone to the stranger and back again, wondering if exhaustion had finally broken my brain. What do you people want? I asked. The stranger finally spoke for the first time. We want to know why you haven't quit yet. That question hit harder than expected. Because honestly, I didn't know anymore. Most people would have quit months ago. Maybe years ago. Rational people probably should have. I had no money, no connections, no office, no investors, and barely any support left in my life. But every time I got close to giving up, something inside me kept pulling me back toward the screen. Toward the idea. Toward the possibility that maybe everyone else was wrong. The stranger sat down on the other end of the bus bench like this was a completely normal conversation. You hungry? He asked casually. I almost laughed. I had exactly $11 left. Not really, I lied. He nodded like he knew I was lying. A few minutes later he came back from a vending machine with crackers and a bottle of water and tossed them beside me. I hated how grateful I felt for something that small. The voice on the phone finally introduced himself as Victor. Apparently he owned a tiny software consulting company 2 cities over. One of his clients had shown him my platform demo earlier that week. He said your product solves a real problem, Victor explained. But he also said the person behind it seems completely unstable. I frowned. That's encouraging. I'm being honest, he replied. You disappear for days. Your emails sound desperate. And your website looks unfinished. He wasn't wrong. At some point survival mode had started leaking into everything I touched. When you're drowning financially, people can sense it. Investors sense it. Customers sense it. Even friends start keeping their distance because desperation makes people uncomfortable. Victor kept talking. But despite all that, he said, you've got instincts most developers don't. The stranger beside me nodded in agreement. For example, he added, you focused on small businesses before everyone else started paying attention to them. That part mattered to me more than they realized. Because my whole life people made me feel small. Invisible. Replaceable. And somewhere along the way I became obsessed with helping people who felt the same way. Tiny online shops. Family-run businesses. People trying to survive against giant corporations with endless money. I understood them. Maybe because I was one of them. The stranger introduced himself as Marcus. He had worked with startups before, mostly helping companies scale once they got traction. But judging by the way he looked at my laptop bag, I could tell he wasn't impressed yet. Curious maybe, but not impressed. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something honestly," he said. "If your own family doesn't believe in you anymore, why should anyone else?" I didn't answer right away. Because beneath the anger I felt toward my mom, there was something worse. Fear that she might actually be right. That fear followed me everywhere. It followed me back to the apartment later that night after Marcus finally left. It followed me when my roommate opened the door looking stressed out and half annoyed. "You disappeared," he said. I thought something happened. I dropped my bag near the couch. Something did happen. The apartment smelled like instant noodles and cheap detergent. Tiny place. Peeling paint near the windows. Heat barely working. We'd lived there almost 2 years because neither of us could afford better. My roommate Tyler had watched my entire startup journey from the front row. The all-night coding sessions. The failed launches. The excitement every time a new customer signed up. The depression every time another one canceled. At first he believed in me more than I believed in myself. Lately though, even he seemed tired. "You need sleep," he said quietly after I explained the Thanksgiving disaster. I laughed bitterly. "Sleep doesn't pay rent." "No," he replied, "but burning yourself into the ground won't fix things either." I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the energy. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my head. My mom's voice. Victor's call. Marcus asking why anyone should believe in me. Around 3 a.m. I opened my laptop again. 3 new user signups had appeared overnight. Tiny numbers. Most people would ignore them. But I stared at those signups like they were oxygen. 3 strangers somewhere in the world had looked at my broken little platform and decided it might help their business. That meant something. Then I noticed one of the usernames. I froze. Because the email attached to the account belonged to someone connected to my brother's company. And suddenly a question started forming in my mind that made my stomach tighten. Had my family really stopped paying attention to me? Or were they watching more closely than I realized? I stared at the screen for almost a full minute, hoping I was wrong. But the email address was real. It belonged to someone from my brother's company. Not just any employee either. Someone high up. I clicked on the profile information again just to make sure my exhausted brain wasn't imagining things. Same company domain. Same name I'd heard my brother mention before during one of his endless conversations about sales targets and corporate meetings. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Because my brother never talked about my startup unless he was making fun of it. So why was someone from his company suddenly signing up for my platform at 3 in the morning? I barely slept after that. The next morning I checked the dashboard again. The account was active. They had already tested several features and uploaded sample inventory into the system. Whoever it was, they weren't casually browsing. They were studying it. Tyler noticed the look on my face while pouring cheap coffee into a chipped mug. "What happened now?" he asked. I turned the laptop toward him. He squinted at the screen. "Okay, that's weird. Right? You think your brother knows?" I leaned back on the couch. I honestly don't know what to think anymore. Tyler sat down across from me quietly. "You know what I think?" he said after a second. "I think your family stopped understanding you a long time ago." That hit harder than expected. Because deep down I knew he was right. My family saw success in one very specific way. Stable paycheck. Nice house. Predictable life. Anything outside of that looked reckless to them. Especially after my dad died. Losing him changed the entire family dynamic. Fear replaced ambition. Survival replaced dreams. And maybe that's why my mom reacted so harshly at Thanksgiving. Maybe watching me struggle reminded her too much of instability. Of uncertainty. Of everything she spent years trying to escape. But understanding someone's pain doesn't make their words hurt less. Especially when those words follow you everywhere. Over the next few weeks, things became stranger. The mystery user from my brother's company kept logging in daily. Then 2 more employees from the same company signed up. Then another. I tried convincing myself it was coincidence. But it didn't feel like coincidence. At the same time, Victor and Marcus started checking in regularly. Not as investors exactly. More like observers waiting to see if I'd collapse under pressure. Marcus visited the apartment twice after that first night. Every time he came over, he asked uncomfortable questions. "What happens if this fails again? How much debt are you hiding? When was the last time you took care of yourself?" I hated those conversations because they forced me to confront reality instead of hiding inside ambition. And reality looked ugly. Collection notices piled near my laptop. My credit cards were maxed out. The landlord had started threatening eviction notices. Meanwhile, my startup was somehow growing and falling apart at the exact same time. New users kept signing up, but the servers crashed constantly because I couldn't afford better infrastructure. Customers emailed me with bugs faster than I could fix them. Some nights I stayed awake for 30 hours straight trying to keep the platform running. Success sounds exciting until you realize growth can destroy you faster than failure if you aren't prepared. One night around 2 a.m., I got an email from a small business owner named Elena. She owned a handmade jewelry shop online and had been using my platform for 2 weeks. Her message was short. Your software helped me process more orders this month than ever before. Please don't give up on this. I read that email at least 10 times. Because for the first time in years, someone wasn't talking about my potential. They were talking about actual impact. Real people were using something I built. That should have felt amazing. Instead, it terrified me. Because suddenly failure wouldn't only affect me anymore. People were starting to rely on this thing. Around the same time, my brother unexpectedly called me for the first time since Thanksgiving. I almost didn't answer. What? I said flatly. Straight to the point. No apology. No small talk. You're still working on that business? I laughed quietly. You called just to ask that? There was a pause. Then he lowered his voice slightly. Listen, someone at work mentioned your platform. Every muscle in my body tightened. And apparently a few people think it's interesting. Interesting. The same idea my family mocked for years was suddenly interesting, now that strangers were paying attention. I could hear office noise behind him through the phone. You told them about it? I asked. No. But someone there knows me. Another pause. Then he finally admitted something unexpected. Mom's been asking about you. That caught me completely off guard. After Thanksgiving, I hadn't heard a single word from her. No text. No call. Nothing. What does that mean? I asked carefully. She checks your LinkedIn profile almost every day. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to believe she regretted what she said. Another part remembered the look on her face that night. The certainty in her voice. Worthless. That word still echoed in my head during quiet moments. My brother cleared his throat awkwardly. She thinks you hate her. I stared at the wall silently. Because hate wasn't even the right emotion anymore. It was disappointment. Distance. Exhaustion. Before hanging up, my brother said one more thing. You should be careful. That immediately put me on edge. What's that supposed to mean? I can't explain right now, he muttered. Just, if your platform gets bigger, people are going to notice. Then he hung up. I sat there holding the phone, trying to process the conversation. Tyler looked over from the kitchen. Everything okay? No, I admitted quietly. And things only got worse from there. 3 days later, my platform crashed completely during the biggest traffic spike I'd ever had. Orders froze mid-processing. Business owners started panicking. Emails flooded my inbox faster than I could read them. I spent 16 straight hours trying to save the servers. At one point I slammed my fist against the desk so hard Tyler thought I broke my hand. This is impossible, I muttered. Marcus happened to call during the meltdown. How bad? He asked. Bad enough that everyone was probably right about me. That's not an answer. I rubbed my eyes hard. I can't keep this thing alive anymore. There was silence on the line. Then Marcus said something that made my chest tighten. Then maybe it's time to decide how badly you actually want this. That same night, while staring at error messages flashing across my screen, another email appeared in my inbox. But this one wasn't from a customer. It was from a major tech company. And the subject line made my heart stop. Acquisition inquiry. I stared at the email for so long that the screen eventually dimmed. For a second, I genuinely thought it had to be fake. Nobody goes from being called a worthless burden at Thanksgiving to getting acquisition emails from a tech company a few weeks later. That kind of thing happens in motivational posts online, not in real life. My hands were shaking as I clicked it open. The company name was real. Huge. The kind of software company people in the startup world constantly talked about. I'd watched interviews with their founders on YouTube while eating instant noodles at 2 in the morning. And somehow they were emailing me. The message itself was short and professional. They claimed someone internally had been tracking the growth of my e-commerce platform and wanted to discuss strategic opportunities. Strategic opportunities. Corporate language for either partnership or buyout. Tyler nearly spilled his coffee when I showed him. No way, he whispered. Exactly. You think this is real? I don't know. But deep down I did know. Because over the last month, traffic on my platform had exploded. Not publicly. Not in some viral overnight success kind of way. It was quieter than that. More dangerous. Small business owners were telling other small business owners. Shop owners and Facebook groups were sharing links. Tiny online brands were recommending my software because it actually solved problems they had. I hadn't even done proper marketing. The product was spreading on its own. And now bigger companies were noticing. Tyler paced around the apartment while I reread the email again. This changes everything, he said. Maybe it should have felt exciting. Instead I felt sick. Because the platform was barely surviving as it was. If a major company started looking closely at my code base, they'd immediately see how fragile everything really was. Half the infrastructure was patched together through desperation and sleepless nights. I wasn't some polished Silicon Valley founder. I was a broke guy running servers from a laptop while hiding overdue rent notices under pizza boxes. Then another thought hit me. What if my brother's company had something to do with this? That idea wouldn't leave my head. The timing was too strange. Employees from his company signed up. My brother suddenly warned me to be careful. And now a major tech company wanted to talk. Something was happening behind the scenes and I couldn't see the full picture yet. Marcus arrived at the apartment later that afternoon after I forwarded him the email. He read it twice without saying a word. Well? I asked. It's real. You sure? Very. That should have made me feel better. Instead, his expression worried me more. What? I asked carefully. Marcus leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. You're not ready for this. The words landed hard because I already knew they were true. You think I should ignore it? No, he said immediately. I think you need to understand what happens next. He explained how acquisition talks worked. Due diligence, investor reviews, background checks, financial audits. The deeper he went, the tighter my chest felt. Because my company wasn't clean. Not financially. Not technically. Not emotionally. I'd built the whole thing while barely holding my life together. What if they see the debt? I asked quietly. Marcus looked at me for a long second. They will. I sat down heavily on the couch. For years, success had felt far away. Abstract. Like something other people reached. Now it suddenly felt close enough to touch. And somehow that scared me more than failure ever did. That night, Victor called again. You haven't responded to them yet, have you? No. Good. His tone instantly made me nervous. What's going on? There was silence for a second. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. The company contacting you has a reputation. What kind of reputation? They buy small startups before crushing potential competitors. I froze. Victor continued carefully. They acquire founders, bury the product, absorb the technology and move on. The room suddenly felt colder. So you think they want to kill the platform? I think they want control of it. After the call ended, I couldn't stop pacing the apartment. Because for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. People wanted what I built. And that changed everything. The next few days became chaos. Emails kept pouring in from users. Traffic doubled again. Then tripled. At one point the platform processed more orders in a single afternoon than it had in the previous 2 months combined. I barely slept. Tyler started handling customer support just to keep things from collapsing completely. Marcus connected me with a freelance engineer to help stabilize the servers. Victor kept warning me not to trust anyone too quickly. And through all of it, my mom still hadn't contacted me once. Not directly. But my brother had. 3 missed calls in 2 days. I finally answered the third one. You need to meet me, he said immediately. What for? Just do it. Something in his voice felt off. Not arrogant like usual. Nervous. We met at a small diner halfway across town later that evening. The second I walked in, I could tell something was wrong. My brother looked exhausted. Tie loosened. Dark circles under his eyes. He kept glancing toward the windows like he expected someone to walk in. You're freaking me out, I said as I sat down. He lowered his voice. The company contacting you? Yeah. My company's partnering with them. Every thought in my head stopped at once. What? They've been monitoring emerging e-commerce tools for months. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Then he leaned closer. And your platform came up internally weeks ago. A cold feeling spread through my chest. You knew. I didn't know it was yours at first. But now you do. He nodded slowly. I wanted to be angry. But honestly, confusion hit harder. Why are you telling me this? My brother rubbed his face tiredly. Because I heard something yesterday during a meeting. He looked around again before speaking. They don't think you can scale the company yourself. My jaw tightened. And they think if they pressure you financially, you'll sell cheap. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. Every overdue bill, every server problem, every sleepless night suddenly felt connected to something bigger. Maybe I was paranoid. Or maybe I was finally seeing how the real business world worked. Why help me? I asked quietly. My brother stared down at the table for several seconds before answering. Because despite everything, I don't think you're a failure. That was the closest thing to kindness I'd heard from him in years. And somehow it hurt. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another email notification. This time from the tech company directly. But the subject line was completely different now. Final offer before competitive action. My heart started pounding. Then my brother said 7 words that made the entire situation feel even more dangerous. You have no idea who you're fighting. I barely slept after meeting my brother. His warning kept replaying in my head over and over. You have no idea who you're fighting. By sunrise, I was sitting on the apartment floor surrounded by empty coffee cups, staring at my laptop while customer notifications kept flooding in. New businesses were signing up every hour now. Orders were processing nonstop. Somehow the tiny startup everyone mocked at Thanksgiving was turning into something real faster than I could control it. But success didn't feel glamorous. It felt terrifying. Because the bigger the platform got, the more pressure closed in around me. The tech company's final offer email sat unanswered in my inbox. The number attached to it was life-changing. More money than I had ever seen in my entire life. Enough to erase every debt. Enough to buy a house. Enough to never worry about rent or bills again. A few months earlier, I would have accepted instantly. Now I couldn't. Because something about it felt wrong. Marcus agreed. They're rushing you for a reason, he said while scanning the offer on my laptop. Companies don't pressure weak products. They pressure dangerous ones. Dangerous. That word stuck with me. For years people treated me like I was weak. Like I was lost. Like I was chasing fantasy while everyone else lived in reality. Now suddenly billion-dollar companies saw me as dangerous. The shift felt surreal. Victor arranged a meeting with a small group of independent investors that same week. Nothing flashy. No giant conference rooms or luxury offices. Just a handful of experienced entrepreneurs in a plain workspace above an old warehouse downtown. I remember walking in wearing the only decent shirt I owned, trying to hide how exhausted I was. One of the investors looked at me and asked the question I feared most. Why should we trust you with our money? Normally that question destroyed me. But something inside me had changed after Thanksgiving. Maybe humiliation burns away fear eventually. Maybe hitting rock bottom leaves you with nothing left to protect. Either way, I stopped trying to sound impressive. I told them the truth. I told them about sleeping on couches while building the platform. About maxed out credit cards. About my mom calling me a worthless burden in front of my entire family. About wanting to quit at least 100 times. Nobody interrupted me. And when I finished, the oldest investor at the table leaned back and smiled slightly. You know why most startups fail? He asked. I shook my head. Because founders fall in love with money before they fall in love with solving problems. Then he pointed at my laptop. You built that because you understand struggling business owners? That matters. For the first time in years, someone looked at me and saw more than failure. 3 days later, everything exploded. The tech company publicly launched a competing platform almost identical to mine. Same features. Same target audience. Even similar branding. The startup world online immediately started comparing us. And because they had unlimited resources, everyone assumed I was finished. Users panicked. Some businesses canceled subscriptions overnight. Social media posts started appearing saying my company would be crushed within months. I sat frozen reading comments while anxiety twisted my stomach into knots. Tyler looked ready to punch a wall. They copied you, he said angrily. Marcus stayed calmer. They expected you to panic. I am panicking. Good, he replied. Now panic productively. That became the longest week of my life. I barely left the apartment. The entire team, if you could even call us a team, worked non-stop trying to improve the platform before users disappeared completely. And something strange happened during all the chaos. Customers started defending us online. Small business owners posted about how our support team actually answered emails. How our platform felt built for real people instead of corporations. How we listen when problems happened. One video from a shop owner went viral after she said, "Big companies see us as numbers. These guys actually care if our businesses survive." That video changed everything. Traffic surged again. Not because we had better marketing. Because people trusted us. The giant company had money. We had loyalty. And loyalty turned out to matter more than anyone expected. Then came the moment I never saw coming. About 6 months after Thanksgiving, I was invited to speak at a small entrepreneurship conference. Nothing huge but big enough that local business media covered it. I almost declined because public speaking terrified me. Marcus forced me to go. "You spent years hiding from judgment," he said. "Stop hiding." The event went well. Better than expected, actually. I talked honestly about startup failure, financial stress, and building businesses without pretending success was easy. People connected with it. For once, I wasn't trying to sound like a genius entrepreneur online. I was just telling the truth. After the talk ended, I stepped backstage and checked my phone. 7 missed calls from my brother. Then one text. "Mom's here." I froze. My stomach immediately tightened. I hadn't seen her since Thanksgiving. Part of me wanted to leave through another exit. But before I could decide, I turned the corner and saw her standing near the hallway entrance. She looked smaller somehow. Older too. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said, "You look tired." I almost laughed at how normal that sounded after everything that happened. "So do you," I replied. She nodded slowly. And then, to my complete shock, her eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong about you." Just hearing those words felt unreal. This was the woman who never apologized. Never admitted mistakes. Never showed weakness in front of anyone. But now her voice shook while she stood there looking at me like she barely recognized the person I'd become. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "After your father died, I became terrified of uncertainty. And every time you failed, I thought life was teaching you to stop before you got hurt worse." I didn't know what to say. Years of anger don't disappear instantly. Real life isn't that simple. But for the first time, I understood her fear instead of just her cruelty. Then she said something that completely blindsided me. "I need to tell you something about your father." My chest tightened immediately. She looked down at the floor before continuing. "The week before he died, he took money out of his retirement account." I frowned. "Why?" Her eyes met mine. "He invested it into your first business idea." I felt like the air got knocked out of me. "What?" "He believed in you," she said softly. "Even when nobody else did." I couldn't speak. My dad had secretly believed in me this entire time. And somehow, my mother had carried that knowledge for years without ever telling me. Then she reached into her purse and handed me an old folded envelope. On the front, written in my father's handwriting, were 4 words that completely broke me. "For when he succeeds." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably my dad's. "I know everyone thinks you're stubborn. Maybe you are. But the world changes because of people who refuse to quit when quitting would be easier. If you're reading this, it means you kept going. I'm proud of you for that." I had to stop reading for a second because my vision blurred. All those years believing nobody understood me, and somehow my dad had understood me the entire time. Even before I understood myself. My mom stood quietly across from me while I tried to pull myself together. "I wanted to give it to you years ago," she admitted softly. "But every time another business failed, I got angry. Not because I hated you, because I was scared you'd lose yourself chasing something impossible." I looked at her for a long moment. For years I'd replayed Thanksgiving in my head like proof that I wasn't enough. But standing there now, I realized something important. Broken people sometimes break other people without meaning to. That doesn't excuse the damage. But it explains it. "I meant what I said that night," she whispered, tears running down her face now. "And I regret it every single day." Part of me wanted to hold on to the anger. Honestly, it would have been easier. Anger gives you someone to blame. Forgiveness forces you to heal. And healing is harder. "I can't pretend it didn't hurt," I finally said. "I know. But I don't want to carry it forever either." She nodded slowly, almost like she didn't believe she deserved even that much. We didn't magically fix everything in one emotional conversation. Real relationships don't work like movies. Trust takes longer to rebuild than it takes to destroy. But that night was the first real step. And weirdly enough, it happened right when the rest of my life was changing too. Over the next year, the company grew faster than any of us expected. The platform that started on a broken laptop in a freezing apartment eventually became one of the fastest-growing small business software companies in the country. Investors who once ignored my emails suddenly wanted meetings. Podcasts invited me on to talk about entrepreneurship, startup growth, and resilience. The craziest part? I still felt like the same exhausted guy who once sat at a bus stop with $11 in his pocket. Success doesn't instantly transform you into someone fearless. If anything, it makes you realize how uncertain everything still is. But little by little, things stabilized. We hired real engineers. Moved into a tiny office. Built an actual support team. Tyler became our first operations manager after surviving those chaotic early months beside me. Marcus officially joined as an advisor. Victor ended up becoming one of our earliest investors. And the giant tech company that tried to pressure us into selling? They eventually backed off. Not because we outspent them. We couldn't. But because small business owners kept choosing us anyway. That became the biggest lesson of my entire journey. People don't just support products. They support stories, values, trust. We built our company by treating struggling business owners like human beings instead of numbers on a spreadsheet. And in return, they helped build us too. About 2 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, a business magazine published an article valuing the company at over $50 million. I remember staring at the headline in disbelief. 50 million. The number sounded fake even in my own head. But honestly, the money stopped being the most important part a long time before that. What mattered more was proving to myself that failure wasn't final. That being lost in your 20s doesn't mean you'll stay lost forever. That sometimes the people doubting you the loudest are carrying fears that have nothing to do with your actual potential. My relationship with my brother changed too, slowly and awkwardly. One afternoon he visited our office for the first time. He walked around looking genuinely stunned at how many employees we had. "You actually built all this," he said quietly. I laughed. "Apparently." He shook his head and smiled slightly. "You know what's funny?" he admitted. "At work, people talk about your company like it came out of nowhere." I looked around the office filled with tired employees, whiteboards covered in ideas and half-finished coffee cups. "Yeah," I said. "Overnight success usually takes a few brutal years." Even my mom started changing over time. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But genuinely. She began asking questions about the business. Real questions. Curious questions. She even started bragging about me to relatives the same way she used to when I was younger. The first time I overheard her say, "I'm proud of my son," I honestly didn't know how to react. Because for years I chased success thinking it would erase pain. But it doesn't work like that. Success can buy comfort. It can buy freedom. It can even buy time. But healing still happens slowly. One conversation at a time. One forgiven moment at a time. One decision to keep going at a time. A few months ago, I went back to that same neighborhood where everything changed. The same street where I walked out after Thanksgiving feeling completely worthless. The bus stop was still there. Same cracked bench. Same cold wind. I sat there for a while thinking about how close I came to quitting. Not just that night. Dozens of nights. Maybe hundreds. And that's the part people don't see when they hear successful entrepreneur stories online. They see the valuation numbers, the headlines, the company growth. They don't see the loneliness, the self-doubt, the moments where one cruel sentence from someone you love almost convinces you to give up on yourself completely. But here's what I learned from all of it. Sometimes people speak from fear instead of truth. Sometimes failure is just training in disguise. And sometimes the person everyone calls a burden is simply someone whose story hasn't finished yet. Before I left the bus stop, I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo I keep saved in my favorites. It's a picture of that old handwritten note from my dad. For when he succeeds. For years I thought success meant proving everyone wrong. But now I think it really means proving to yourself that you were worth believing in all along.